appropriate and consistent with our ideals.
So I think it's fair to say, see if you agree with me, that the future leaders, as early as next year, are going to have to deal with this transformation that's occurring fairly rapidly.
Absolutely. I heard the first time that the Air Force this year has graduated more UAV pilots than they have conventional pilots as well. They've also changed their policy, though, to some extent, recognizing that being in the aircraft is important, because it used to be the sensor operator didn't have to be a certified pilot. But as I understand things now, they are being flight qualified as well too, so they can understand what it means to be in the air and provide a greater realism and understanding of the information that's coming back to them.
Do you have any closing comments with regard to this obviously challenging field that's occurring?
It is an obviously challenging field. It's moving at a breathtaking pace. You can see advances. Just follow the AUVSI newsletter or whatever it is to see all the new things that are happening, not only in this nation, but around the world in terms of the use of unmanned technology. It's crucially important that we continue this discussion of the proper and appropriate use of unmanned systems into the future and at an international level. This is not a U.S. issue alone. It's a world issue.
Thank you very much, Professor.
My pleasure.
Professor Garreau, as you know, we're here at the United States Naval Academy at the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership, and we're spending 2 days working on issues regarding ethical ramifications of emerging military technologies. You were just involved in a panel dealing with soldier enhancements, ethical and legal ramifications. Could you tell us generally what kind of work you've done in that area?
Well, I wrote a book called Radical Evolution, which is about the promise and peril of enhancing our minds, our bodies, and what it means to be human. And now I'm the Lincoln Professor of Law, Culture, and Values at Arizona State University, and I'm involved with the Lincoln Center for Applied Ethics there. And my prime task is being the director of the Prevail Project, which is trying to figure out humanistic responses to emerging technologies and how we can govern our futures rather than be overwhelmed by our technologies.
So you perceive, I take it, that there are a number of challenges with regard to the future. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's...
Can you generally describe what those challenges might be?
Well, we're at an inflection point in history. For the first time in hundreds of thousands of years, our technologies are not so much aimed outward at modifying our environment as in the fashion of fire, clothes, cities, agriculture, and space travel. Instead, we're increasingly aiming our technologies inward at modifying our minds, our memories, our metabolisms, our personalities, and our kids. And if you can do all that, you're the first species in history that really taking control of your own evolution and engineering it. And that's what I call radical evolution. There are 4 technologies that are performing this transformation. I call them the GRIN technologies for the genetic, robotic, information, and nano revolutions. And the critical thing about them is that they are all advancing on a curve of exponential change. This was originally started off by the information technology industry, which has now famously, the amount of computer firepower that you can buy for $1 has been doubling every 18 months since the first chip in 1959. That means that that's an increase of over 1 billion times in the lifetimes of people who are not that old. We've never seen anything like that before in human history. We've never seen our challenges coming at us on a curve, because a doubling is an amazing thing. It means that every step, every 18 months, is as tall as all of the previous steps put together. Well, you can pretty easily demonstrate that if our challenges are going up like this, if our responses are more or less flat, well, the species is obviously toast, because it's just the gap between our responses and our challenges just keeps on getting greater than greater. There are 3 scenarios for how this could all end up: heaven, hell, and prevail. In the heaven scenario, basically all of these technologies advance on the curve. We conquer pain, suffering, stupidity, ignorance, even death, and it's essentially indistinguishable from the Christian version of heaven, and we all live happily ever after. That's a credible scenario. You can see the headlines every day about our advances. Maybe it could happen. The hell scenario is the mirror image of the heaven scenario. That's the one in which these incredibly powerful technologies get in the hands of madmen or fools. And you can imagine wiping out the human race in the next 20 years. And that's the optimistic version. The pessimistic version would be that you wipe out all of life on Earth. And again, that's a credible scenario, unfortunately. You can imagine that happening. The third scenario is prevail, and that's the one I'm rooting for. I'm not predicting it. I don't do predictions. I do scenarios. But I am rooting for it because it is the humanistic scenario. And being a humanist, I'm a sucker for that. The heart of prevail is, it's not some middle ground between the heaven and hell scenario. It's way off in its own territory because the heaven and hell scenarios are both techno-deterministic, which means that they basically posit that that the technology's in control, there's not much we can do about it, hang on tight, the end. If this were a summer blockbuster movie, the heaven and hell scenarios would be have great special effects but not much plot. Prevail, by contrast, is the scenario that is based on the notion, suppose what matters is not how many transistors you can get to talk to each other. Suppose it's how many ornery, cussed, surprising, imaginative humans you can hook up. In the prevail scenario, the heart of it is perhaps there's not one curve, maybe there's two. Suppose our adaptive responses as humans are coming up almost as fast as our challenges. There's some reasons for guarded optimism about that, believe it or not. If you looked out at the future of the human race from circa 1200 AD, you'd see marauding hordes and you'd see plague and you'd say, okay, it's over for this species. But then in 1450, we get this brand new technology, movable type and the printing press. And all of a sudden, we have a brand new way of storing and sharing and collecting and distributing our ideas that we never had before. And the result is amazing. First, you get the Renaissance, and then you get the Enlightenment, which leads to science itself and to democracy. And all of a sudden, in the world we've got today, in which the Dark Ages are ancient history in every conceivable sense. And the thing is that none of that, all of that was bottom up. This was all invented by people doing the best they could as they went along. It was usually in opposition to the top-down hierarchies of the day, like the papacy. This was beyond the imagination of any one king or country. The Venetians did not wake up one day and decide that they were going to invent world trade. They got run off their land by the marauding hordes, and they started out into the swamp for defensive reasons, and they started filling in the shallow spaces. And then they looked for something to do for a living, and they noticed that the Pope was going to need a lot of boats to get the Crusaders to Palestine, and the rest is history. World trade was the result. But it was all bottom up. This was people just doing the best they could to prevail. You saw the same thing on 9/11. When the fourth plane, Flight 93, never makes it to its target. Why? Because the Air Force was so smart? No. Because the White House was so smart? Hell no. It's because a couple dozen people on board that aircraft, empowered by their airphone technologies, they figured out, diagnosed, and cured their society's ills in a little under an hour flat. Was it an ideal solution? Well, obviously no. They all died. But they prevailed. And the question is, well, if that's the model, if the heart of prevail is imagining us increasing our responses on an ever faster pace to match our challenges, well, what would that look like? How would you know if you were entering that scenario? And my hypothesis is maybe what you'd see is a rapid increase in flock-like human behavior that you'd never seen before. And I'm thinking, have you seen any of that lately? And well, what about eBay? That's not just the world's biggest flea market. That's hundreds of millions of people doing very complicated things without leaders. What about YouTube? It helped swing an American presidential election. What about Twitter? I have no idea what Twitter is good for, but if it flips out the Iranian government, I'm interested. So my question is, okay, if we are seeing this rapid and in fact increasingly astounding amount of human flock bottom-up behavior, can you accelerate that? We know that DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and similar organizations, can and do rapidly move up the first curve of technological change. They can accelerate the first curve. So my question in the Prevail project is, how can we accelerate the second curve? How can we increase our chances for this species by bringing up our bottom-up responses as fast as we possibly can? Because I have a hunch that this species has a long way to go and a short time to get there.
Before I ask you what your thoughts are with regard to how to do that, I want to ask you a question with regard to the scenarios that you've come up with. Now, you indicate you're not a futurist, you're not making predictions. From a social science, I suppose, or a humanist point of view, how do you what information do you use, review, etc., to come up with those scenarios?
Well, I'm a reporter by training. I've spent almost 40 years as a reporter and editor at the Washington Post. And I've written books that are journalistic. So actually my techniques are shoe leather reporting, basically. In the course of, my question about these technologies was based on confusion on my part. I found historically that following my confusions can be a useful strategy. I figure if I don't understand something, there's a limited number of possibilities. Either A, I'm a dummy, which is never to be discounted, or possibly, well, I don't get it, maybe other people don't either, and so I should follow my confusions to try to sort this out. So the first thing I did was try to get my arms around this rapid change that we were seeing all around us, societally and culturally, and then try to figure out the human response, because I'm not a technologist. I don't care that much about boys and their toys. I'm interested in culture, values, and society. Who we are, how we got that way, where we're headed, and what makes us tick. And also, my target audience is not technologists. I refer to my target audience as, quote, my mother. And that's code for somebody who's intelligent and interested and doesn't have the first idea what I'm talking about. So I've got to bring it down to a place where she can get it. And it's a she, which means that she doesn't care that much about the gear. She cares about her family and her friends and their futures, and so that's what I have to be focused on.
And how, in your opinion, can human society work towards the prevail, if you will?
Yeah, how can it prevail? Well, I'm not positive this is going to work. I'm not entirely positive that what I'm trying to do is possible. Both the heaven and the hell scenarios are entirely credible. We could end up doing very bad things in the next 20 years. And there's no question that we're going to be seeing technological miracles occurring in the next 20 years. And maybe that will transfer successfully to our human nature and to our culture and values. Those are credible scenarios. But the trouble with both heaven and hell for me is that they're trying to map these nice smooth curves of technological change onto human history. And human history in the past has never been marked by any kind of nice smooth curves of any kind. It's all been hiccups and reverses and loops and belches. We've had Huckleberry Finn futures, in which Huckleberry Finn, for example, faced by the combined forces of the law and religion and everything else, decides that he's going to finally, quote, do the right thing for the first time in his life. And he's going to turn in the runaway slave, Jim, who's been his best friend. And he starts writing the letter to Jim's owner to tell the owner where she can find her runaway slave. And he tries to harden his heart against Jim so he can do the right thing for the first time in his life. And he just can't do it. All he can think of is how many times Jim had been great to him. And so finally he says, I'm just born bad to the bone. And he rips up the letter and he says, and if I get a chance to do something bad like that again, I'm going to do it again. Well, that's the classic Prevail hero. That's the humanistic response. And the question is, how do you create more Huckleberry Finns? And I'm just at the start of the Prevail project. I just launched it earlier this year. And so one of the things I'm doing right now is I've got graduate students who are going through the historical record of rapid social change and asking, almost in engineering terms, how did they do this? What worked? Ataturk, for example, transformed Turkey from a backward agrarian society into a modern industrial secular society in one generation. The society went from illiterate to literate in one generation. How did he do that? That's what I want to know. And we're working that question across the environmental movement, the women's movement, all sorts of rapid social changes to see if we can identify what worked and see if that can be accelerated. So one of the examples, the biggest challenge that I've run into right now is that there are, up at Harvard Business School, there are some people who call themselves cognitive economists, I think. And what this basically means is marketing with a PhD. But they have observed that there's something that they call the hyperbolic discount. I don't know why they call it hyperbolic. I'll get back to you on that. But basically what it means is that humans, the one thing I give them credit for is that they're trying to deal with humans as they are in the real world. They're interested in how human brains work. And one thing that they've learned with this hyperbolic discount is that if I offer you an amount of money A today versus some amount of money B a week from now, if I'm offering you $10 today, it's amazing how much money I have to offer you in a week at B. If it's like $10 is A, it'll have to be like $100 at B, because otherwise you'll do the sensible thing and take the bird in the hand. Well, the problem with this, of course, is it means that humans have a lot of trouble thinking about the future. I mean, it's not rational to demand that much money, for a week later. But nonetheless, that's the way we do it. So the cognitive economists don't try to say what we need is a better class of humans, because that's a non-starter. They say, well, how can you deal with that? And one of the things that they've learned, for example, is that they've learned that if you tell a human, do the right thing today, and something great will happen to 100,000 people in a year, doesn't work. If you say, do the right thing now, and something good will happen to 2 people in a year, a little bit better, but not great. However, if you say, do something good today, and in a year, something great is going to happen to this little blonde girl named Janie in pigtails in a wheelchair whose name is Fluffy. Now that works. And to me, I'm a professional storyteller. I'm a journalist, so I'm saying, oh, yeah, you lead with the pretty girl in the wheelchair every time. I mean, yeah, duh, you didn't know that? But this comes to narrative. I think, one of the things that may matter is we got to create better stories about our future than we've got. Stories is how humans process complex information. You take a whole bunch of complex things coming at us, and a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a hero, and all of a sudden things make sense. Tom Clancy, the famous techno-thriller writer, once said that the difference between fiction and nonfiction is that fiction has to make sense. And and I vibrate to that. So I think so I have a list of 20 or 30 projects so far that I've already got for the Prevail project, but one of them is coming up with some better stories, and because I think that's the way ideas go viral.
Given the fact that we're doing this interview for Carnegie, is there does your Prevail scenario speak to what type of global governance there might be in the future?
Yeah, governance.
Haven't you gotten there yet in your research?
Yeah, governance is at the heart of this thing. The full title for the Prevail project includes the phrase "Wise Governance for Challenging Futures," and I'm in the law school at ASU. I particularly avoided the word law because I'm not at all sure that our existing legal institutions are up to this task. I think, if our challenges are going up like this, if you're waiting for the chairman of House Judiciary to solve your problems for you, well, just to say that is, it's laughable, right? So, and I have a colleague, Gary Marchant at ASU, who's doing something called the PACE project, and he's noticing that as these challenges coming at us ever at increasing pace, the law is actually slowing down. It's taking longer and longer to get a judicial decision. It's getting longer and longer to get a law passed. Well, I mean, so if this is what if our existing institutions are even slower than straight line, then I think it's pretty obvious that either we're toast or we need new forms of governance. And so I'm very interested in this. One of the subjects that came up was here was the subject of honor, for example. I'm fascinated by that. Is honor a governance mechanism? Are people governed by their sense of honor? And I think the answer is clearly yes. People die over whether or not they feel they're being honorable. This is very, very powerful. So the question is, for example, all right, well, if that's true, how would you use honor as a governance institution? And that's one of my lists. That's on my list along with the other 80 or 100 that I'm trying to investigate.
Very interesting. And the last question, are there particular human characteristics that you assume exist in the Prevail project?
Yeah, I assume, well, I'm specifically assuming that you have to deal with the humans that you got. I'm not positing that we're going to have some better class of humans than the crotchety kind that we've had for the last several millennia. I think that, what we're looking at is, Exodus in the Bible is a classic Prevail story. Here you are, 80,000 people with their sheep and their goats and so forth, and they're in the Sinai desert and they're trying to get to the Promised Land, and God sends them an angel to guide them because He says, "I'm so sick of you guys." This is almost a direct quote from Exodus. "I'm so sick of you guys. You just drive me nuts. If I stay here one more minute, I'm going to smite you all." That's almost a direct quote from the Bible. So He sends the angel, and so they follow the angel for 40 years. Now, the Sinai is not that big a desert. An Israeli tank can make it across in a day. If you follow the rising sun rather than this angel, the Promised Land is on your left. Hard to miss, But no, they bitching and moaning every step of the way. They follow the angel for 40 years. And of course, the way that's usually interpreted is that they didn't want anyone with a memory of slavery to enter into the Promised Land. But anyway, that's a particularly miraculous form of Prevail because it deals with, people as they are in all of their ornery cussedness, and it assumes that that can wend its way to glory. Critics of the Prevail scenario could say that Prevail is counting on a very large miracle to occur, to which I respond, no. It's counting on several million small miracles like the ones we've cooked up before in the past as a species.
The interviewer normally doesn't make a comment, but I hesitate to end this without thinking also of the Iraqi voters putting their fingers in the ink
Yep.
and going back to their neighborhoods. That says something. I'm not sure what it says, but it certainly.
But it brings a small tear to your eye about the species. Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you very much. Very, very much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Rick.